God bless you. God bless you. God bless you. So we're gonna, God bless you. God bless you. God bless you. Come on in. Come on in. Come on in. God bless you. God bless you. It is 6:50. And as promised, this is Pastor Wanda with Victory Worldwide Ministries. God bless you. God bless you, Sister Sandra. God bless you. Want you to come on in, and for about 30 minutes, maybe 35 minutes, I'm going to time this because I know I can go longer, but we're going to time this to about 30 minutes, no more than 35 minutes. And if you know of anyone that is maybe dealing with a breakup, a broken relationship, trying to get over a relationship, trying to recover from a relationship, going in a divorce, coming out of a divorce, surviving a divorce, or just surviving a real bad relationship, why don't you share this Facebook Live with them for a few minutes? We're going to talk about trying to figure out how to get glory when relationships go to the left. And a lot of times in the body of Christ, it's easy to say, but real talk, it's hard sometimes to allow God to get glory when you are trying to deal with your feelings, when you are in your feelings and you're trying to get to that peaceful place and still let God get glory at the same time. And so I want you to come on, and for those that will be viewing the replay, when you review the replay, why don't you show this, tag somebody, and let them know, hey, we're getting ready to give you a word of encouragement, because I am a realist and I understand that you got to understand all relationships will not work. All marriages will not live to see 20 years and 30 years. But guess what? It doesn't mean that either person is a bad person. But what it does mean is, in the midst of it, how do we as Christians make sure that God gets glory out of everything that we go through? And that's even when relationships don't go the way that we would want them to go, because sometimes even in relationships, we're always saying, but God, you could work this out. But what happens when God decides not to work it out? And what happens when God decides this is not what I want for you? What happens when you've given your all and then God says, I have something else or someone else or someplace else I want you to be? What happens? And then how do you make sure that God gets glory even when you are in the midst of a broken story? So how do you recover from a relationship that didn't go the way you wanted it to? And have you ever been in a relationship that at the end of it, you didn't feel godly? There was nothing about you that wanted to be godly. There was nothing in you that wanted to be peaceful. Because if you're real honest, that there are some relationships that, guess what? You don't want to be peaceful. You want to bust the windows out of the car. You want to go and take the debit card. Come on now. We all are saved, but there are some times when you are in your feelings and that it is hard to still make sure that God gets glory. But I want you to understand, in every aspect of your life, not just in church. Come on. That's right, Sister Sam. Nothing. Come on. There are times that you just, you don't want to be nice. You don't want to be sweet. You don't want to be the one that's always taking the high road. And you don't want to always be the one that has to be, yeah, God's going to get the glory. Sometimes you just, you want to be nasty. You want to do your own thing. And guess what? But at the end of the day, you cannot worship the God that we worship and not say, but God, you got to teach me. Come on here. How many times have you ever had to say, God, you me how to do this one? You're gonna have to teach me how to work through this one. You're gonna have to hold my hand through this one. Have you ever been in a relationship that at the end you had to say, God, you're gonna have to hold my hand through this one, because I got some things that's going on in my mind. I got some old me. I got some Peter in me, and Peter is trying to make me get out of character. Come on now. Peter was the one that Jesus knew that he didn't have a whole lot of self-control. And sometimes when you are coming out of a relationship, you lack the self-control that you need so that God can get glory. So just for a few minutes, we're going to talk about encouraging you to let God get glory even in a broken story. And I want you to know that even while you're hurting, you can still recover gracefully. Come on here. Even while hurting, you can still recover gracefully, and you can still recover with God getting the glory. But it takes something extra in order for you to get there. And let me tell you something. Healing is a choice. Being restored by God is a choice. Being renewed by God is a choice. And when you step outside of God, sometimes it's hard to let that choice take over. So look, this is what I want you to do. I'm going to talk about 3 points on tonight, and I'm going to answer some of the questions that some of the people inbox me as far as some of the questions. And I'm going to answer those questions with 3 different points. Look, for some of you that know me, so I was married for 15 years. And after 15 years, November of 2013, God released me to lead my foundation church, one of the hardest things I've ever had to do in my life. But what made it even harder was trying to do it God's way and not my way. And now it's a little transparent, because guess what? I don't care what anybody tells you, when your feelings are involved, it's hard to do it God's way. I don't care how anointed you are. I don't care how awesome you are. When your feelings are involved, it's hard to do it God's way. And it's hard to make sure that God gets the glory. How do you know God gets the glory? Because at the end of it, God can stand up and God can be exalted. God can look good. God can get the praise. Somebody can walk away and say, I know they saved. I know they changed, because the person I used to know, this would have ended badly. The person that I used to know, this ain't how they normally ride. I know God is working in their life. That means God has gotten the glory. And when you've gotten to a situation in your life that somebody can walk away and say, that was God right there, that means you finally grown up in God to the point that you told yourself, God's going to show me how to make sure he gets the glory out of this relationship, even when I'm going through a broken story. And so listen, one of my biggest issues was, God, how do I let you get the glory out of this? And how you let God get the glory, sometimes it requires you not telling your story. Somebody better help me. It requires you not telling your story. It requires you sometimes looking bad. It requires you sometimes going somewhere and sitting down. It requires you sometimes to bridle your tongue. Every situation is not meant for your full story at that very moment. God will allow you sometime to go sit down for about 10 years before you say anything, because guess what? He is deprogramming you. He's getting you to a point that he's going to make sure all of that envy, all of that malice, all of the feelings have been flushed out of you. And so some of you are saying, but I just want, and God is saying, nope, it ain't your season. Nope, it ain't your season. And then God will give you a platform to speak. But when you speak, it'll be a speaking of love and of joy and of peace. And so God didn't let me speak. God allowed me to bridle my tongue. And so guess what you got to understand when you're trying to figure out, how do I recover from a broken story? First, you got to learn how to hear from God. I didn't say man, I said God. You've got to hear from God. Listen, let me give you a side note. Don't walk away from a relationship because of what somebody else has told you. People that tell you, oh, if it was me, I'll leave. Well, let them leave. But if God didn't release you, you stay. If God didn't say, get up and go, then you stay right there. There are some marriages that, guess what? God has ordained this is going to be the date that's going to end. But there are some marriages that God didn't end on this day. It's pride that made it end. And so you've got to make sure that you are hearing from God and you're not prematurely leaving out of something because you are in your feelings. And so you've got to learn how to hear from God yourself. And everybody hears from God in a different way. Look, when the Bible says that Adam and Eve covered themselves, and God says, how did you know I was coming? And Adam said, I heard the sound of you walking in the garden. Adam had gotten so connected with God, but he knew the sound of God. He knew God's sound when he was walking through the garden. This is my question to you. How do you commune with God? How do you hear from God? How do you be able to know when God is saying enough is enough, and God is saying, okay, this is where I want you to exit. This is where I want you to leave. You've got to be able to hear from God by yourself. yourself. And so even in the midst of a dark situation, the first thing I had to do, I had to make sure I was hearing from God. That means, guess what? I had to separate myself from everybody else. You can never make a major decision and you still hanging out. You're still connecting with friends. When God is getting you to a pivotal point in your life, you got to go sit down. You got to fast. You got to pray. You got to lay prostrate before God. You've got to make sure that it's a God move and not an emotional move. Let me tell you something about relationships. Every mistake in a relationship does not determine who that person is. See, I done lost some of you. Just because somebody makes a mistake doesn't mean they are a bad person. Just because somebody makes a mistake doesn't mean God's going to release you to leave. Yeah, he just, he kind of fake and phony. He don't love me the way but guess what? If God didn't tell you to leave, you better sit yourself right there with that fake and phony person until God talks to you. But you will never know how God talks to you until you get to know God for yourself. You've got to be able to hear when God says run and when God says sit. You've got to be able to hear for yourself when God says check out and when God says hold what you got. There are divorces happening all around us. It's because we're not sitting still long enough to know when God is talking to us and when God is giving us a sign. How do you let God get the glory? You make sure God has given you dismissal papers or standing power to stay. Because guess what? When God says leave, he automatically will get the glory because you got peace with it. Come on here. You got peace with it. When you don't have peace with it, you got to ask yourself, is it me or is it God? And so don't just separate a family because you're in your feelings. You make sure you are hearing from God. And don't you listen to people when they say, oh, I can't believe they still in it. You tell them I'm still in it because God didn't ordain me to get up out of it. And sometimes God will give you standing power because of an end result. And so when God gives you standing power, you stand. When God gives you leaving power, then you leave. Let me tell you something in reference to me talking to God and saying, God, I don't understand. What do you want me to do? And when God released me to leave, guess what? In all honesty, I did not leave when God released me to leave because let me tell you something. I'm sitting here thinking to myself, I know the God that I serve. You are a powerful God. If you put your full weight on this, you can recover. You can make this work. If you put your full weight on this, God, I know who you are. I know what you can do. And because I know who you are, I know you can restore this marriage. Somebody is saying, I know you can restore this relationship. I know you can bring it back together. But when God has ordained and said, I'm done, I don't care what you do. You can stay 5 extra years. But if God's done breathing, guess what? God's done breathing. That's why God told Moses, I'm done. You're not going to enter into the promised land. It didn't matter what Moses said at that point. He was not going into the promised land. And so I had to come to terms that this was God speaking, but it was not personal. It had nothing to do with me and everything to do with the plan of God. Let me say this again. Every marriage will not see 30 years. So it's amazing when people say, I come against divorce. It's not going to happen. There will be divorces. Let me show you something. When the Bible was started with Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, guess what? Cain killed Abel. Bottom line, Cain killed Abel. Noah got mad at one of his sons because his son was disrespectful. That means life is going to happen. And when life happens, God expects the children of God to make sure he gets glory out of it. When Cain killed Abel, Adam didn't check out. He held his ground. And guess what? God came back and blessed him with another son by the name of Seth. It's not always going to work the way you want it to work. Every relationship is not going to survive the test of time. But when it does not survive, you still make sure that on your end, God can clap his hands and say, I am pleased with you. I am proud with how you exit. I am proud with how you dealt with it. There are people right now that have gone on to glory because somebody was mad because they got a pink slip. And because they didn't know how to handle it, they went back and just shot up stuff. because they didn't know how to handle the exit. Let me tell you something. When God has ordained for you to exit, know how to handle the exit and know how to make sure God gets glory. And every story is not meant to tell when you're upset and when you're angry. You've got to go through a season of rest and a season of peace and a season of healing. But first, you've got to be able to hear from God. And so one of the questions that was how did you know when to leave? I heard from God. And I operate with God with signs. It was like, God, give me this sign. And I'll be honest, God gave me that sign. Then I said, God, give me this sign. I'm just like most of y'all. I was like, give me another sign. I know before it was all done, I asked God for maybe about 7 or 9 signs because I could not believe what God was doing. And what happens when you don't understand why God is not working it the way you want to work it? Come on here. When you're in church and you're saying, God, I know you can do this. But God says, but I'm not. But God, I know you can work this, but God says, I'm not going to work it. Why? Because there's a story at the end that I've got to get glory from, and I trust that you gonna make sure I get the glory. Can I tell you, when God trusts you with trouble, no matter what the trouble is, he is trusting you with trouble to know that at the end of the story, you're gonna make sure he gets glory. And that somebody is gonna be able to say, wow, I don't know how you handled that. And you're gonna say, it was the mighty hand of God that helped me get through this. It was the hand of God that helped me to hold my head up high. It was the hand of God that let me cry in the midnight hour, but still prop me up in the daytime. You got to make sure that God is still getting glory. And the only way to do that, you got to make sure that you are hearing from God. Listen to me. I want to tell you that in the Bible, in John chapter 11, when Jesus was getting ready to raise Lazarus, because guess what happened to Lazarus? He died. God let him die. Mary and Martha watched him die. Come on now. They knew who Jesus was. Jesus was a resurrecting power. Don't always think that God's going to use his power. And sometimes what happens when God don't answer? What happens when God don't resuscitate? What happens when God don't bring that relationship back to life? What happens when God lets the divorce go through? What happens when they walk out of the door? You serving God, you paying your tithes and offerings, you shouting, you are the biggest usher, you are the best praise and worship leader. And now you mean to tell me God can't even step in? Look, Lazarus was the same way. He was Jesus' friend. You mean to tell me you couldn't even come in and let him live? He let him die. But guess what? He let him die because he was going to resurrect him in a different way. He needed the people to see the glory of God. How do I know that? Because John 11 says that Jesus said to God, thank you for listening to me. And now let them see your glory. Let them see how powerful you are. Can I tell you, some of you, God has allowed you to go through a storm so that you can show God's glory in your life, that somebody can see how powerful you are, how resilient you are, how you are still standing. Can I tell you, somebody is trying to figure out why you didn't lose your mind, why you didn't lose your job, why was you didn't lose things. And God is saying, because she was willing, he was willing to go through it and still let me get glory. Come on here. Listen, in order for you to let God get glory, you got to hear from God directly. You got to know that whatever's going on, this was God. God didn't give me options. I had to listen to God. Let me tell you something. Somebody tell yourself, I am recovering. I am recovering. People say, how did you get over that? You need to start telling them, I am recovering. They say once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. And they'll tell you, I am a recovering alcoholic. You tell your neighbor, I am recovering from hurt. I am recovering from that last storm. I am recovering. Let me tell you something. Years ago, I was walking down some steps and I fell down steps, missed almost every step. And when I fell down the steps, I felt a little pain, but I got up, went on about my business. And when I was walking, I could tell that something was wrong with my ankle, but I never stopped to worry about it. I just got up and went on about my business. Somebody see where I'm getting ready to go. I never dealt with it. I just kept going. And on one occasion, I was trying to run a race. And while I was running the race, I mean, my ankle just completely gave out on me. It forced me, somebody see where I'm going. It forced me to go and check on my ankle from that one fall. It forced me to go and check on my ankle, but it didn't force me until I was trying to push myself to a level that I didn't need to be at. Some of you have fallen and you're not dealing with it. You're not letting yourself heal. You're not letting yourself recover. You've gotten up, put on your best makeup, put on your clothes, went back out in the world, and you never dealt with that hurt. You never dealt with that pain. Whether it was ordained by God or you did it yourself, there's still pain involved and still feelings that you got to deal with. And so you've got to learn how to hear from God, but you've also got to learn how to be healed from God. Some of you guys are still dealing with a relationship 15 years ago, and you dated somebody 2 or 3 times since then, but you still go back to that one incident. Why? Because you failed and you never dealt with the pain. I got up and acted like nothing had happened. I was putting my heels back on. I was dressing up, looking good. But guess what? I never dealt with the pain until I went running and the pain dealt with me. Some of you are in a season that the pain is now dealing with you. You've got to allow yourself to heal. Look, God can never get glory when you are still dealing with the inner issue when it comes to healing. Somebody look at yourself and tell yourself, neighbor, we've got to learn how to heal. You got to learn how to heal. And healing is not overnight. You are recovering from healing. Healing does not take overnight. I had to go and have surgery just to realize that I had a chipped bone from that fall that took place almost a year ago before I finally dealt with the pain. But by that time, apparently, when I fell, I chipped it. But then walking on it, it completely broke off because I didn't deal with it. Some of you are further in because you're not dealing with your pain. Hey, sometimes you just got to say, I'm hurting. I need to stop. I need to regroup. And I've got to allow God to heal me from the inside out. So I had to have surgery for them to repair the issue that I didn't deal with years ago. Some of you will never have a successful relationship in the new relationship because you ain't dealt with the pain from the old relationship. You're just carrying baggage from one relationship to another because you've not dealt with the pain. God cannot get the glory when you're holding somebody else accountable for your old story, something that happened years ago, months ago. Let me tell you something. Somebody told me on one occasion, the best way to get over one relationship is to jump into a new relationship. I thought that was very interesting. I said, that's interesting to me. But then God gave me another scenario. And God says, wonder if you cook some food and if you burn that food. Talk, God, if you burn the food, what are you going to do before you cook something else? If you're really hungry and you really want to eat, what are you going to do? I said, God, I'm going to go in the kitchen and I'm going to clean up the mess that I made the first time before I make another meal. Y'all better come and help me. God says, well, why in the world would you go into another relationship without letting me clean up your mess or whatever you're going through first? Why would you want somebody to have to deal with your burnt food instead of you just letting me heal you first from the inside out? Some of you are allowing somebody to have to deal with the remnant of something else instead of you first saying, God, heal me, heal my mind, heal my heart. Make sure that there are things that I utter out of my mouth that are of God. One of the questions was, how do you deal with somebody and you're trying to be peaceful and they just won't let you to be peaceful? Let me tell you what the healing process includes. The healing process includes boundaries. It is in the healing process that you decide what you're going to deal with and what you're not going to deal with. Listen, I'm going to be completely honest. When I was going through the darkest season of my life, there are some times that I would get a phone call from my ex and I would ignore the phone call. Why? Because I was in a healing process and I had to set boundaries. I didn't need to talk to him at that time. Because guess what? I was hearing from God, and God said, this is not the right time to pick up this phone call. See, some of y'all just, in the healing process, guess what happens when you have surgery and you go home? You get to pick and choose who comes see you. You get to pick and choose who you talk to. Why? Because you are in your healing process. And some people that's going to wreck your nerve, you're not going to talk to them while you're healing, because you need to be restored. You need to sit down somewhere. And so you guys are dealing with too much in your healing process. You got to make that circle smaller. And you've got to make sure, guess what? You are picking and choosing. And so you don't have to pick up the phone every time somebody calls. You don't have to reply to a text. When you are healing, guess what? You are sitting still, talking to God, listening to God. And I knew through every phone call, I didn't need to pick up every phone call, because God wasn't going to get glory. And if God wasn't going to get glory, it didn't make sense for me to go forth in this particular story. Listen, so I had to make sure, nope, not going to answer that call. Nope, going to have to wait on that one. Nope, going to have to call back. Because I remembered a few times that I did pick up the phone call, and some of the messages were not godly. It just didn't go right at all. That's right. You got to ignore the distractions. Because guess what? When you are going home and you are healing, you don't answer the phone with everybody. Why? Because you are healing. And when you're trying to make sure God's getting glory from whatever you just came out of, you've got to get away to yourself, and you've got to set boundaries. And you've got to make sure before you go to the next season, I'm healed. Listen, how do you know you're healed? Because you can talk to the person that hurt you, and you can pray and want what's best for them. I ain't talking about play, because at one point I was like, God, go on and bless. But in my heart, I was saying, it don't really matter to me. But the more I let God heal me, every prayer that I prayed, it was a sincere prayer. The more I let God heal me, every prayer that I prayed, it was a prayer praying that God would open up doors. But I'll be honest enough to say that that's not how my heart was in the beginning. See, we don't like being honest. We like saying, yeah, I can pray for my enemies. You praying for your enemies, but that's not really what you're feeling. You're praying out of just monologue. That's just what you're supposed to do. But in your heart, you still saying, I really don't want you to bless them. But when God is getting glory and you let God heal you, child, you don't have to be friends with them, but you so good that you be like, oh yeah, we down. I met a lady on one occasion, and she blessed me real good as far as her ex. And she was saying that it took her a while, but she let God work on her to get her where she needed to go. And when God finally blessed her, they became best friends. He remarried, and he and his wife would hang out with her and her husband. She said that would have never happened if I didn't let God in to heal me. Because when I came out of the divorce, I really wanted to kill him. I wanted to take him out. I was thinking of ways to take him out. She said, but when I let God come in and heal me, I literally prayed, and I wanted him to be blessed. I wanted his marriage to succeed. When you're trying to get God to get glory out of whatever you're coming out of, or whatever story, you've got to let God heal you from the inside out, so that every prayer that you pray is a prayer that you mean. And I'll tell you up front, don't let somebody come into a house that needs cleaning. You let God clean up this house first before you invite somebody to be your partner and your boyfriend and your girlfriend and your husband and your wife. Why would you let a stranger or anybody come into your dirty house? Then why are you letting somebody enter your life when you need healing? And I'll tell anybody, no, I wasn't dating. I wasn't going out, because guess what? I needed to go through a spiritual detox, which means I needed to hear from God. I needed God to heal me, because I didn't want crazy, cray me to be a part of anybody else's life. See, y'all playing games. You got to learn how to listen to God, seek God, and let God heal you. So look, the last point. First, you got to be able to hear from God. You want God to get glory? Listen to God. Listen to what God is telling you. Listen to how God is telling you to handle a situation. Look, especially to my females, if you know somebody is, how do I put this? It's like a bear, real angry, gets upset. Why are you poking the bear? When you are hearing from God and God says it's over, it's done, it's over, it's done. You ain't got to go back and get no sweater. You ain't got to go back and get no tennis shoes. Go buy some more. It is done. Don't poke the bear. When you listen to God, God will tell you don't go back. God will tell you don't call him. God will tell you don't text him. God will tell you you ain't strong enough, because guess what? When you're not strong enough, the bear will pull you back in. When you're not strong enough, you will pull back in and repeat that process. And sometimes everybody don't walk away when you're coming from a crazy relationship. So you got to be willing to hear from God, and you've got to be willing to ask God to heal you, to give you the strength to stay away when God tells you to stay away. Somebody tell your neighbor, don't poke the bear. When you know that if you say this thing, it's going to make somebody mad, why say it? Don't poke the bear. Leave them alone. Leave it alone. God wants you to live and be happy, not to get your point across. And sometimes we got to go tit for tat, but not when you hear from God. When you hear from God, you ain't trying to get your last point in. You ain't trying to go tit for tat. You sitting there saying, God, I want to live my blessed life. How I do that? So listen, when you want God to get glory out of a relationship, how did I start off? All relationships are not going to survive. All marriages are not going to live to see 20 and 30 years. But what does remain the same is the God that sits on the throne. He's the same God that put you in it. He's the same God that allowed you to get out of it. And he's the same God that should get glory through it all, from the beginning to the middle to the end. Just because it didn't end the way you wanted it to end doesn't mean that you sell God out because now you're unhappy. I was unhappy with God for a long time. I mean, just completely, just not pleased with God, because I felt that God could have done better. I felt that God could have worked it out. I now understand better of what God is doing, but it took me time to let God heal me in order to get here to this point. I had a choice: either not hear from God and build up malice and anger. And that's what so many females are right now. If you're dealing with malice and anger or hatred, you know what you didn't do? You're not listening to God, and you're not letting God heal you. Because when you let God heal you from the inside out, baby, you let malice go, you let anger go, you let all that mess go, so that you can live the best life that God has ordained for you to live. And I'll tell any female, just because a relationship doesn't end right, doesn't mean that you have to smear his name through the mud. Doesn't mean you have to take down another man of God. Doesn't mean that you have to take down a woman of God. There are some things that should just go to the grave. There are some things that, guess what? If you're listening to God, if God didn't release you to say it, don't say it. It's not about them. It's about you. God doesn't hold us accountable for how people treat us. God holds us accountable for how we treat people. And if you say that you are a Christian and every day you want to live in the light of God, then that means you got to check yourself and ask yourself, how do I make sure God gets glory? So I'm in the process of closing out the book that God gave me. And the book is entitled, I Loved Her More. And the more you read the book, there's one section in the book that blesses me every time I read it. It blesses me and it brings tears to me all at the same time. And the one section that it talks about is a reason and a season. And so in that particular chapter, it talks about the season of God, that God will allow us to go through certain seasons for a reason, but we still have to find out to make sure God gets glory, even when we don't understand the season. So that book will be coming out soon. But even in the midst, I want to encourage you to let God get victory out of everything that's in your life. Look, the last question that someone asked me at the end was, are you really happy in this season? Listen, when you learn how to hear from God, when you learn how to let God heal you, and God will show you how to live happy in God. I can honestly say that I finally reached that part in my life. But guess what? It has taken a transition. It has taken a while. Healing does not take place overnight. When I had my ankle surgery, it took me a while to be able to put pressure on that ankle. It took me a while to be able to walk. It took me a while to be able to regroup. I'm better now. You never know that I had the surgery. Why? Because I did the process that the doctors told me to do. Y'all gonna make me shout up in here. Look, had I missed the process, I could have been walking with a limp. I could have had to have the surgery all over again. But because I went through the process that the doctors told me, I can walk, I can run, I can do a half a marathon, And you never know that I had that surgery. And so I can live happily because I did it the way that doctors told me to do it. I can tell you that God can find you happiness in him when you do it the way he's ordained you to do it. So look, I encourage you, in a relationship, out of relationship, going back in one, coming out of one, at the end of the day, make sure that God gets the glory out of every story that you've gone through. It's amazing how we can be broken by God, but then we sell God out because we don't understand his process. You don't have to understand his process to honor the glory that he's trying to get out of you. So I'm going to encourage you, make sure you hear from God. What is the best way to hear from God? Baby, sometimes you got to fast and you got to pray. You got to separate, make that circle smaller, and you got to fast and you got to pray. Make sure that you are in the face of God and you can hear God. And then let God heal you. And healing takes a while. So sometimes you have to separate yourself. You got to get by yourself. But give God a chance to heal you, to make you better. Can I tell you something about healing? Nobody can see it, but they can hear it. Come on here. Nobody can see that you're healing, but what comes out of your mouth will tell them if you are healed or not. If you still have that anger tone, you ain't healed. You still cussing them out, you ain't healed. You still rolling your eyes, you ain't healed. And so healing is an internal thing, but it's always reflective based on what's coming up out of you. So get yourself in a season where you can hear from God. Let God heal you from the inside out. And then let God show you how to be happy in him, not in church. Let me tell you something as I'm closing out. I remember on one occasion, as I was getting closer to knowing that I was getting ready to make my final exit, that I had to go because God had already instructed me and told me what to do. I was just saying, God, I'm not going to worry about this. But let me tell you what God had to finally do. I remember going in church service, and immediately when I walked in the door, it was like this bad spirit came over me that I didn't even recognize who I was. I mean, it was a spirit of saying, I don't even know why I'm here. I don't want to be here. These people are fake. I'm just talking about just so out of character. Let me tell you something. When God has ordained for something to happen, and you just tarry and tarry, you get mean, you get negative, and you don't even see it. And people are looking at you like, what in the world is going on? But guess what? I didn't see it. But in that one instance, I felt it. And it was as if God was saying, okay, you feel it now? All right. You understand what I'm trying? And what God was trying to tell me is the longer I stayed, I was going to get worse and worse. There was not going to be any deliverance. There was not going to be any glory. I sure wasn't getting ready to pray for nobody, not with the spirit. So guess what? God was not going to get not one bit of glory out of me. Come on here. Some of you, guess what? That's why some of y'all hate your job. That's why you mean on your job. You rolling your eyes on your job. You looking at folks sideways on your job because God has released you. God has already told you to update that resume. Go on and look for somewhere else. God is already trying to connect you for your entrepreneur life. And guess what? You getting angry. You're getting angry because God is trying to push you and you trying to rebel, talking about something. No, God, I feel you can work it. He can, but guess what? If he chooses not to, you might as well just go on and do. But in that instance, God says, you feel it? I said, I do. God was not going to get any glory from that point because at that point, I literally already checked out. And it was in that moment that I said, God, if you can't get glory, I can't stay. If I can't have the heart of you, I can't stay. And when you don't have the heart of God, and that's why I tell people, if anything happens in your marriage, whether it's infidelity on either part, if God tells you to stay, you better learn how to forgive. If God tells you to stay, you better hear from God. You better get in God's face. You better let God heal you in that marriage. You better let God show you happiness in that marriage. Because if God says stay, even if it's infidelity, you better learn how to forgive. Because guess what? You still got to learn how to respect. You still got to learn how to honor. You still got to learn how to do what it is God has ordained you to do. You don't get an out clause. And so guess what? God was saying, you don't belong here no more. So it's really nothing you can do. And I'm not getting ready to pull in the glory. And it was at that point in November 2013, I knew that God was telling me, okay, it's time for you to leave. And so I left, but even in the midst of leaving, I listened to God every step of the way. I'm trying to tell you that no matter what God says, no matter what you're in right now, make sure that God gets the glory at the end of every situation. And it is in his glory that God will show you how to have happiness in the midst of it all. Don't think that because one relationship didn't work, God won't show you love and joy in another relationship. I've known people to get a divorce or separated or just out of a relationship with 3 kids, and God has sent a husband or a wife that'll love them as if it was their kids. Don't minimize the power of God just because one thing didn't work, but make sure that God gets the glory out of every exit that's in your life. Hey, we're getting ready to close out. As always, I want to remind you, hear from God. Let God heal you, and then watch God show you happiness in him. And remember that because of Christ, you walk in victory. How often? Every day. God bless you. Have a great evening.